video is called General Rules about Nutrition because it applies to most people, but not everyone. It's a general rule. As always, getting personalised advice and over time figuring out what works for you is important to make sure certain combinations of food is right for you. The first rule about nutrition is aim for most of the time to be eating whole and real foods, for example vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices. The opposite of this, which you want to keep a limit to, are processed and refined foods like processed fats that you would find in fried foods, biscuits and baked goods, processed meats like sausage rolls, hot dogs, etc., refined carbohydrates like sugary drinks, like soft drinks, soda drinks and white breads. So that rule is pretty simple. As I said in the last video, not all fats are equal, not all proteins are equal, and not all carbs are equal. Often people oversimplify these foods and say things like fat is bad or carbs are bad, and that is really overdoing it. Some fats are bad for sure, and some carbs are bad, but some fats are very good for us, and some carbs are very good for us. So let's break these down a bit more. As I said before, carbohydrates are sources of energy that are represented in calories or kilojoules. And that can range from simple carbohydrates like sugar to complex carbohydrates like starch and indigestible forms like fibre. In a very basic way, they are like long chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms, and the longer these chains are, the more complex the carbohydrate is. When you eat carbohydrates, the body digests and breaks these chains up into simpler and simpler molecules, which eventually form sugars, and they use this as energy, which our cells need like car engines need fuel. The simpler the carbohydrate, the quicker it gets released into our blood, which is called the glycemic index, which I'll describe in the next video. So the general rule is complex carbohydrates are better than simple carbohydrates most of the time. But sometimes we need simple carbs, like sugar, for a quick energy hit, say if we're doing lots of exercise, for example. So they have their place as well. If the gut cannot digest a carbohydrate, then this is called fibre, and it passes through our gut and reaches the end of our intestine called the large intestine or the colon, where it either helps us poop or healthy bacteria break that down and do good things for us, as I mentioned before, like produce vitamins and minerals, anti-inflammatory compounds, hormones and whatnot. The next general rule is fibre is very good for us, and most people are nowhere near getting enough in their diets. Then we have fats. As a general rule, stick to oils and fats that are naturally occurring, like olive oil and avocados. Avoid processed and refined oils like vegetable oils and trans fats that are in biscuits and cakes. They are definitely not good for you. The other general rule is unsaturated fats are good for you, like polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats in vegetables, olive oil, nuts and seeds. Trans fats are always bad for you, and saturated fats are a little bit controversial. Most guidelines suggest we limit the amount of saturated fats in our diet, and these come from animal fats like fatty red meat, cream and butter and baked goods. Often these are added to other foods like milk chocolate, so the original dark chocolate might actually be good for you, but the added milk fats are not. The reason saturated fat is such a controversial topic is because there are many types of saturated fats. Some look to be bad for us and others maybe not so bad. Overall though, the bad ones are more common, and it is best to focus on healthy fats like the naturally occurring unsaturated fats, like the poly and monounsaturated fats I mentioned before. And the final general rule for fats is, it is okay to cook with extra virgin olive oil. Studies have shown it's got a very high heat tolerance and it's quite safe to cook with, so don't be afraid of that. As for proteins, there are animal sources of protein like meat, and plant sources of proteins like beans, peas, legumes, and grains. Evidence shows that vegetarians who don't eat animal meat still get enough protein in their diets if they eat healthy in a diverse range of foods. So you don't have to eat meat if you don't want to. However, if you want to eat meat, then aim for animals that are raised in an environment as closely matching their original environments as possible. For example, cows are grass-fed, chickens are free-range, and so on. Small studies have shown grass-fed beef is higher in healthy fat versus long-term fed grain beef. And finally, is animal protein or vegetable protein better for you? This is a much debated area with no clear answers. However, multiple studies support protein sources that are rich in plant protein, with some animal sources such as grass-fed meat, fish, and poultry.